Hello world, it's Dr. Deborah Thompson here from One Health Lessons. This particular talk today is going to be extra special because this particular conversation is spanned out over 3 weeks. We'll be discussing personality and psychology with Professor Brian Little. Now, I first met Professor Little years ago at McGill when he was my teacher. My class was entitled Personality, and it changed my life. And I think that this series of interviews will change yours. Professor Brian Little attained his Ph.D. in personality psychology from the University of California at Berkeley. After graduating, he then became a Commonwealth Scholar at Oxford. And then he was an inaugural fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. After that, he was teaching psychology at Carleton University and McGill University in Canada. And he also taught at Cambridge University in the UK and Harvard University. For 3 consecutive years, he was elected the favorite professor designation by the graduating class at Harvard. It doesn't stop there, though. Professor Little believes strongly in making the fruits of his research available to the general public, and he has graciously agreed to being interviewed today. His book, one of my favorites, is entitled Me, Myself, and Us: The Science of Personality and the Art of Well-Being. That is actually an Amazon bestseller. And his TED Talk, entitled Who Are You Really?, has been viewed on YouTube and TED platforms over 20 million times. I have to say, I probably watched a good portion of those 20 million times. You can also find out more information at brianrlittle.com. I hope you enjoyed this webinar series. Onwards and upwards, and let's welcome Dr. Little.
Let me just finish a bit more on extroverts. Because they seek out stimulation, sometimes their nonverbal behavior is really notable. So they like to, let's see, I don't know whether I can do it. For comfortable communication, they like to get in close like that. There's a lot of body contact, usually unsolicited. And introverts, on the other hand, tend to want to stand back a little bit. I'd be back in my bookshelves, for normal interaction. And there are fascinating cultural differences in this. You're working with some Asian groups, aren't you? Yeah. And you've experienced this, I'm sure, and some of your listeners will have as well. And we have to differentiate different Asian groups because there are massive differences between Hong Kong and Laos, for example. But generally speaking, compared to Western cultures, those, for example, in Japan, are much more likely to be introverted in their interaction style, excuse me, at the very least, which means that they like to stand back. They don't like to be gung-ho and very touchy and all that sort of stuff. And they think it's actually rude to do what, let's say, quintessentially Americans, I'm Canadian, so I'm sort of halfway between the British and the Americans in this, but with the quintessentially American extrovert, they think it's rude if you don't come in to interact. You're literally seen as standoffish if you don't do that. And so it gives rise to something I write about in the book, which is the United Nations dance. I think it was my TED Talk too, where somebody from an extroverted culture, to be polite, moves forward when they're interacting, and somebody who's from an introverted culture stands back. And it gives rise to a kind of vector resolution problem. There's a limited number of ways it can be resolved. And what happens is the person from the more introverted culture just goes in the continuing backward spiral motion, sorry, I'm on screen now, until they get pinned in the corner being breathed upon by a lusty extrovert. So yeah, and so there are these little conflicts there's also conflicts in the way they speak, but I'm not going to reprise the way I discussed that. You can point people to the TED Talk where I talk about the difficulties of talking about alcoholic behavior. So I'll leave that for people to dig into. So those are the basic differences between the big five dimensions and their contrasts. And that is a starting point only. But as I've said in the later chapters of the book and in the TED Talk, is that it? Is that Deborah? Is that Brian? Is that Chuck or Akiko? Are we just a bunch of traits? Or are there things that we want to engage in that define us, that are the question that we really ought to ask when we're trying to say, what are you like? What do we know when we know you? And I don't think it's just your traits. And this is why I talk about individuals who act out of character. People may say, no, you're not an introvert. Good gosh, you're the most animated, extroverted prof I've had. This is what a lot of you guys at McGill said, right? But what you've missed is what the project is underneath that. I adore being a professor. It means the world to me. And to profess means to convey with passion what you believe to be true, no holds barred. And at 8:30 in the morning, if you want to keep your students engaged, you may have to do things. And in my case, humor comes naturally. So music does too, but I wouldn't inflict that on anybody. But you do it because you can't wait to tell them about the studies. And so it's not really being extroverted, it's sort of pseudo-extroverted, but it's construed as a stable aspect. And that can be misleading. I think we need to be very aware that people act out of character. And we do that for two main reasons. Freud called it Lieben und Arbeit, love and work. Love and work. You may find, some of you who are listening may have found that you've been acting out of character as a pseudo extrovert for 12 years because you love your spouse and dearly. And you have been constrained to act in a way that actually goes counter to your basic temperamental and dispositional orientations. And so, and he or she also may feel that in other aspects of life, they have experienced, excuse me, the feeling that this isn't them. This is phony. I mean, you can delude yourself for a number of years, but at some point, it's just sucking the spirit out of you, and you need to have a conversation. I've talked about people having to adopt a free trade agreement, which is a play on free trade, I know, because I have a tendency to play with words. But it means that I will act out of character to advance our core projects. If you will grant me what I call a restorative niche every now and then. So for me, as a pseudo extroverted person or an introvert who acts out in the core project of exciting my students, I need to find a quiet place to go after doing that. I need a restorative niche that is low in stimulation, that is devoid of other people, someplace that is a garden, for example, the kind of stuff that you're looking at with the extraordinary benefits of nature, if we can sustain it, all of those play into my restorative niche. But somebody who is highly extroverted and has had to play the role of being a pseudo introvert 9 hours a day for 12 years, they may also ache to engage with the world differently, and their restorative niche isn't quiet. Their restorative niche is getting excited, fly again. You know, they can't. They feel so frustrated now with not being able to engage with the world, and typically the social world with other people. So we all need these restorative niches. And I guess the final thing I would say before we use up all the juice in the computer is that human personality is complex. It isn't simply a matter of traits. That's the beginning of the conversation, to see what your traits are. And you can find ways of assessing yourself on the big 5 traits. Some of them are in the book. But we're more than that. And I used to go to class and have the students say, they'd be lining up before class, and I'd say, "How are you doing?" And they'd say, "Fine." Next day I'd say, "How are you doing?" And they'd say, "Fine." That would go on for 2 or 3 days. And then one day, I don't know why, for some reason, I just said, "No, how are you doing really?" And that "no, really," meaning, yeah, I really want to know how are you, seemed to trigger a whole bunch of things you wouldn't get if it was just how you doing. We tend to say fine. Most people aren't going to do a disquisition on their illnesses when they're asked how you doing. But they'd talk about, well, my boyfriend's gone to MIT, and my parents are divorcing, and I'm having a hard time coping with my anger, and we get into the guts of their life in a way that just traits wouldn't allow us to. We may say, well, you're particularly upset because you are neurotic, but the project of reconciling with my mom, who I'm really beginning to have regrets about at this stage of my life, that's a different, more nuanced and more profound conversation. And so I think that partly what I do in the book and what I did very, very swiftly in the TED Talk is to ask people not to stop at your traits, but to use them as a springboard for self-reflection and a springboard to a more substantial question about how are you doing really? And that means looking at the projects in your life that give you meaning, a sense of connection with the world, and a sense of efficacy. And that's the end of the lecture.
That was, well, if you don't mind speaking just a few more
Sure.
minutes.
Yeah, okay.
A lot has come to mind. And really appreciate how you were talking about ocean, and that takes care of the outer layer of the onion that we're peeling back, right? Yeah. And when we think about traits, when we think about constructs, as you mentioned in this book, there was something in this book that really made me, well, honestly, a lot of this book has made me think, just to show the viewers how much like underlying in this book. This is why I have
that I like to see. I like to see that.
Dog ears, everything. So this book has made me think a lot, and reminds me of how to view the world outside of myself, but then also reflect inside.
Yes.
And being a leader, you have to have incredible self-awareness.
Yes.
And also, it sounds like from parts of this book that as a leader, you're not meant to put others in the boxes that you have created for yourself. So say Correct. It seems like, and please tell me if I'm not wording this correctly, but say you grow up with a certain situation, you have seen the world in a certain way, and then you find somebody who you just can't figure out. There's something.
Yep.
They're fitting into some of your identified identities, let's say.
Yeah, yep, sure. Yep.
So with that, how can one start to reflect and be like, oh, I need to see this person in a new way?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
is possible. And it can be done just by modeling, by having sessions, training sessions, or whatever you want to have them, where they are able to try out new goggles for looking at things. George Kelly used to talk about fixed role therapy, when people would actually and this is a more active intervention to increase this ability to get out of your constraining constructs and use more adaptive ones, is that you play the role of a totally different person. And Kelly would say, okay, your name is now Ronald Barrett. It's no longer Ed Fitzsimmons. And you are going to, and then he writes a sketch for this person, showing how he will approach the day, what he will look for in other people, and he practices it. And he goes out, and the next session with Kelly, he'll come back and he'll find out, how did it go? And they may say, well, it was a little hard at first because I don't normally do it that way. But if the role exercise has been done effectively, which Kelly always did, and those who followed his practice have done as well, then there's one magic day when the person comes back and says, I can't believe it. I am Ron Barrett now. So that they have now identified with that role. And some people will say, and I think it was students at McGill, would say, but is that healthy that you've changed your whole identity? And I think it is, to the extent that you have been stuck before. If you are stuck, George Kelly thinks of people as scientists, erecting and testing hypotheses about their lives and then revising them on the basis of feedback from the environment. And if you constantly are hitting your head against a wall, and for 6 years now, you're looking at everybody in the same way, you're stale. This role improvisation exercise gives you the capacity to mix things up and to experience deeper, not only the possibilities of other people, which you're referring to, but also your own possibilities. So there's a fine line between being able to teach that, as I would to my classes, and experience it as under the guidance of a clinician, and how you can transmit it in workshops for leaders. It's sort of that latter one is sort of in the zone between sort of didactic teaching and experiential learning in a clinical situation. But theoretically, that's what construct change is all about, and it's quite powerful.
It sounds like it's more than just empathy.
Yes, it is. It is. Empathy is affective, and it may not always be effective because there's quite a debate within psychology right now about whether we really need empathy in order to do well with respect to other people, in order to do good. I've coined or resurrected a term that's an ancient term called well-doing. We talk a lot about well-being and happiness and a sense of personal integrity and all that. But well-doing is something else. And that involves, no matter how empathetically you identify with the ecological problems of the world, or with a small animal, or with other people, that isn't going to advance their well-being unless you do something about it. And so well-doing is how you translate empathetic feelings into altruistic deeds or effective ecological projects that sustain the environment. You can wring your hands and bemoan the state of the world with more empathy than you can shake a sugar stick at. But if you're not able to convert from empathy to action, then you're not quite doing as much as is possible.
Right.
That makes sense to you?
It makes sense, yeah. And I'm just thinking through so many opportunities of where, One Health fits in so many places, and it's, not just the concept of that interconnection between everything, but that the approach, and it's the approach that really made me think, okay, we need to get Professor Little here to talk about how we can start to not only understand our own personality,
Yep.
but also the personality of others. And then with that added complexity of cultural nuances, right?
Yep. Yep.
And putting yourself in another person's shoes is one thing. So sure, you can live in a community where you're going to be working, but if you still have those goggles,
That's right.
you're thinking in your own way, yet you're still living in another, in a new community.
Yep.
What you really have to do, it sounds like, is to be in that community, like full force, actively listening to everything, absorbing as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the cross-cultural aspect of it is really intriguing. I think full immersion, whether you're learning French or you're going into a new community in Africa who has water problems, and it involves a kind of immersion where you don't let those standard constructs intrude as much. They're not available. You're speaking literally a different language in one case, or you're living a different cultural experience in the other. And this takes work, but it's also very exhilarating, right?
Right, very much so. And if you don't have the opportunity to live in another place, then it comes down to having thorough conversations and actively listening and having open conversations.
Right.
Is that the best way to say it? Or
No, it is. Yeah, exactly.
with simultaneous self-awareness,
Yep.
as well as listening. That's a hard skill that a lot of leaders.
It is. Yeah, life's complex.
Life is complex. It's true. And certainly problems can be quite complex, and that's the benefit of everybody working together, as long as we can work together.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
So this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to catch up, and it's what you're doing in disseminating the wisdom of One Health is really, it's vitally important. And so keep it up, and the best to all your followers, and restore yourself, and don't forget those niches.
Thank you so much. And of course, I could not be doing this without the work of everybody involved in the global One Health education movement. So thank you, listeners, for being part of this. Onwards, I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Dr. Deb.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.